I've been saying it for a while, and I guess it bears repeating, but I do think that the best practical advice anybody could be giving to CX folks these days is if you're at the IC level and you're closing tickets, learn a little bit of code. It's one of the best things you can do. For a leader, also learn a little bit of code, dust off your data science chops
Yeah.
and your old statistics textbook from college or something. Because I think you're exactly right. I think because ultimately, I still feel like data is everything, and being able to surface and read and tell effective and ideally true stories with data is a really difficult and, at least for now, yeah, uniquely human skill. But we also now have an army of agents that can scrub that data for us and read it way faster than we can. So use those too.
Hello, and welcome to the CX Files podcast. Today's guest is Colin Flanigan. This is our second time talking, so we're going to skip the usual CX Files format, and we're going to have a little bit more of an open freestyle conversation today about CX and AI and all that good stuff. Colin, glad to have you back.
Yeah, so glad to be back. It's great to talk to you again.
So, do you have a fully set up OpenClaw with your own VPS and 100 automations running, or what's your stack right now?
I have four children under the age of 10, so yeah, obviously I've got all that. That's what I'm spending all my time on. I'm keeping up how I can. I'm doing little projects at home here and there, obviously lots and lots of different AI applications within our support stack and tooling, growing every day. But yeah, I feel like I have this sort of hollowed out middle experience where, everybody, there's a lot of people in that middle where they're digging in and they're actively working in these tools and doing all these things. And I find myself either doing incredibly granular work for personal projects I'm working on in my own personal life, or on the other side of things where I understand these tools and their uses of things from a strategic level and I'm operating there. But I don't get as many chances to dive in and do my own dirty work as I used to. It's sometimes nice and sometimes you miss it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's an interesting dichotomy going on right now. My impression mirrors your experience, which is that there's like this in business, right? You want to make a
Hmm.
business decision, and it's this big, impactful decision. You're going to deploy a new tool or whatever it is, and then it's this top-down thing, right? And then there's CTO and there's COO and CFO and whatever. And if you're making like a big purchase, it's like this long drawn out thing, and it's slow moving, and it's impossible to just react to whatever the update of the day is, the newest
Yeah.
thing coming out, right? And that's a very different set of requirements, obviously a very different kind of space to think in. And there's a reason why, I think there was a recent pullback in the stock market of SaaS businesses, right? And everybody was like, "Oh my God, AI is going to automate everything. Why would I ever pay for Salesforce or ServiceNow or whatever it is, right?" And then it's, "Oh, wait a minute. Do you understand how business actually works?" So there's that idea, right? Of there's this business reality of like top-down
Yeah.
control and careful decision making and security
Yeah.
concerns, and it's all these things. And then there's at the same time there's this hobbyist individual. You start with the personal use case, and it's bottoms up, and it can be moving very quickly. And oh, there's a new tool that came out today. I'm going to try it. Right? It's free trial. I don't have to like wait for anybody to approve this.
Hmm.
I don't have to go through like a purchasing process. Like it's just like, oh yeah, like free trial, click, sign up. Oh, this is cool. I'm gonna start using it.
It, that's such a funny thought because it seems so, it shouldn't be a funny thought. That feels so straightforward. I think even just thinking about, do you know how a business works as a jumping off point, and thinking through my experience, I've worked at really small, scrappy, bootstrappy startups. I've worked at larger companies, and you just start to take it as a given that larger companies, there's going to be more bureaucracy and more red tape and more hoops to jump through and to get something done. And things move, maybe not always more slowly, but certainly with more friction. And then smaller companies where things are still kind of lower stakes in a lot of ways. In the grand scheme of things, of course, it doesn't feel like they're lower stakes while you're actually in it, but in the grand scheme of things, lower stakes.
Right.
Um, and you can just do stuff. Winds up being okay. And I think that there's I can't believe I'm about to argue in favor of bureaucracy. But there's been this impression that all that bureaucracy is in fact useless, and it's a snag in the system, and it's only because people are either too power hungry or defensive or risk averse or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm certainly not going to argue that's not the case sometimes. But I think that's an interesting sort of narrative that I'm seeing develop is folks, yeah, being surprised that actually some of those checks and that security and all that stuff is in fact positive. That sometimes not moving at 1,000 miles per hour is in fact good, even when there's really nothing but you stopping you from doing that, as is the case I think we're finding ourselves in here.
Yeah, I forget where I picked it up, but there was this conversation about why doesn't every company just build everything themselves?
Oh,
Especially if you're
yeah,
in like the tech
yeah,
world where you have some engineering capacity, some software
right,
engineering team or whatever. Theoretically, like, you could just build all of the SaaS tools yourself. And like, why don't people do that, right? Like, why would you
yeah,
ever work with a vendor if you could just do it yourself? And of course, this is obvious if you think about it for a minute, but there's a reason why people pay for AWS instead of hosting their
yeah,
own servers,
yeah,
right? It's because you're not in the server business. And it pays huge dividends to hire experts or buy specialized tools. They're very good at what they do, so you can focus on what you do. And even if you're paying quote unquote a premium for them to manage it for you and make sure it's secure and check their pagers on Sunday night at 3 a.m. or whatever, like,
hmm,
you're paying a premium for that, but it's worth it because you can focus on what you do and you have higher leverage there. So
yeah,
your organization will
yeah.
get more impact from focusing. Yeah.
Point. I think that's another interesting sort of offshoot of that narrative that we're seeing with the proliferation of AI usage is and vibe coding, especially
Mhm.
as you really can build pretty much anything. Um, but there is that, and I think that's what I'm referring to with that like kind of middle
Mhm.
area. I'm not sure if the middle is where what it is that you're building, or if it's the high level knowledge or what. So I'm not sure where to categorize everything, but um, I mean, it sure does help, right? To know product design. And this goes back, okay, this reminds me of uh, some developing conversations I've been seeing in the CX space in particular that I think are fascinating.
Mhm.
And in particular, because I think I've just been in it so long that there are these conversations I keep seeing pop up around increased capacity due to higher deflection rates because of AI. And the conversation is then, well, what do we do um, when we have that capacity? What do we do with that capacity? And I think that's a great question, and I'm so glad to see more people asking it. And I think it's great that we're in a position where we have that capacity, and what to do with it is not automatically we just need less support staff. That's nice that we're not just going straight to that. But I feel really interesting, and I don't mean to denigrate at all some of the takes out there that I've been seeing about what to do at that time, but a lot of them are focused on like proactive support.
Made
I,
one of these takes
I was
myself
just gonna say,
recently.
I'm pretty sure I saw one of one of those from you like yesterday. Um, and I think what strikes me about that is that there are novel, there are certainly novel ideas and like novel takes what that proactive support might look like. But the idea that the end game, the ultimate end game, as it were, for customer support should be providing better and better proactive support is certainly not a new conversation, but it almost feels, I don't know, I don't know if that just got like quiet in certain spaces for a while and is now coming back and feels novel, but like every conversation I feel like I'm hearing people have about it seems like it's a novel thing that maybe we're only just considering in certain spaces in certain industries. So I think that's really
Mhm.
interesting. Like it's one of those, the more things change, the more they stay the same, I think, in a good way, in a positive way. So it's interesting. It's like I think the thing that prompted me to say, hey, why don't we do another podcast episode was the other LinkedIn post that I think you and I were engaging on about companies starting to seek out storytellers
Mhm.
specifically by name and like by role title, which I think is fascinating how they're starting to quantify that. But yeah, to me, I saw that article I think our mutual friend Meredith Metzger posted, and I was just like, well, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I can't tell if this makes me sound smarter or more ignorant. Probably both, depending on who's listening. But um, that's just my automatic reaction to those sorts of things. It's like, yes, of course of course people want strong storytellers. That's half the job in CX is an expectation setting and narrative building and relationship building. And so too in marketing and in sales and in most, I think even in design, really. What are we doing but telling a story of how to do a thing and how a thing ought to be done? So yeah, I think I've woven a lot of threads here, but I think it all does come back to that sort of core knowledge and expertise. And I think what I'm really interested to learn and interrogate for myself when it comes to AI at large, and certainly AI for CX, is the threshold of knowledge required to be effective
Mm.
in a certain area with the assistance of AI.
There are a lot of threads here, and I like where you're going. I'm going to try to remember all the pieces here and put them back together in my own mind. Not a comment on you, just my own human limitation here.
It would be fair if it was.
But yeah, so I think the prerogative of business to make money is going to constantly be pushing people who are doing activities that are less valuable to do activities that are more valuable, right? And this
Mm,
like predates the whole conversation about CX, AI, all this stuff, right? This is like as old as dirt. But the format and what does it look like day to day is obviously changing quite rapidly.
sure.
And if you had this idea 30 years ago that our support people could do like a little bit of proactive work, that was like very much a nebulous thing. That was maybe there'd be like a team conversation, be like, hey guys, like, why don't you mention our new product at the end of a support call or something like that, where it's more of a yeah, just nebulous, right? It's not like this discrete, defined sort of process
Mm,
that is like automated, semi-automated or fully automated. It doesn't have the same format to it, and the scope of it would be different and so on. But I think that there's like this reinvention that happens, right? There's this comment I like to come back to, which is that every innovation is basically a UI innovation, and so we're still dealing with the same fundamentals, but it's just
right.
in a different it's a different user interface, basically.
Yeah.
And
That was my immediate reaction to a couple of years ago when this AI usage started to really blow up. And it reminded me of back when I was a kid, the difference between navigating things in like MS-DOS and then suddenly you had Windows. Okay, great. So this is like in many ways, this feels like that. So yeah,
yeah,
I think that's true.
yeah, it's this constant repackaging and repackaging a new UI. Another thing I think I could go on a bunch of tangents here, but one of them is this like idea of bundling and unbundling happens in
Mm,
cycles as well. So you'll have the all-in-one platform that does everything, and then people will be like, "This
mhm.
is too general, and it doesn't work that well for all these things I want to
Right,
do. I'm going to buy a specific tool that does this one
right.
piece." And then there's like 100 specific tools. And you're like, "God, this is too much to manage. I want an all-in-one platform," and it just keeps going and going.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, you could look at this across industries, and it's like a pretty common cycle, I think. Maybe this plays out over the course of some years, but or decade even. But that's another thing
Mm,
that's just funny and related. I want to touch on what you mentioned about storytelling, and
mm,
you mentioned the knowledge threshold required. So those are two threads, but I have a basic hypothesis about where things are going, which is that anything that you can build with a computer, most knowledge work, is essentially becoming more and more commoditized. And
mm,
there's especially if it's like software, right? So software in
mhm.
particular, and especially if it's at the UI layer, right? So you have like, for example, right today we have these super powerful LLMs, and they're all competing together with each other. Yesterday, the two big ones released their own new model within a minute of each other. Like they were waiting till
Right.
they had their like finger on the button, and they're like, oh, they released, time to go, and they both shot it out at the same time. But the LLMs are there and they're not going anywhere. And I think of that as like the utility company or something. It's like everybody needs power and like you just have to get
Yeah.
it somewhere. And if there's
Mhm.
some guy who sells it for a cent less per kilowatt or whatever, you're going to go with the guy who costs a cent less. And their capabilities are not exactly the same, but it is like this continuous like micro leapfrogging that they're doing. And so that's like the LLM layer. And then you have the AI coding tools that can like code anything, air quotes,
Hmm.
anything, of course. We just had the
Hmm.
conversation about how that's not exactly true, but you can very quickly vibe code like a lot of things that you couldn't a year ago and even a few months ago, and it's just getting better and better. The trend there is very clear, right? It's not going
Yeah.
to slow down. The quote is that it's the worst today than it's ever going to be. So it's going to keep getting
Right.
better. And then when all that stuff becomes commoditized, when you can just say, hey, build me a Salesforce clone, and it just, here you go, here's your Salesforce clone, at least the feature set, not the service and the security and all
Sure.
those things. But you could build it, you could build these things. And then what is that? What does the landscape look like at that point? Right? Any company can spin up their own version of anything that's at this app layer, right? So you have the model layer, and then you have the app layer. That's your AI chat, that's your voice bot, that's your ticket management. It's all these things are at
Hmm.
the app layer, basically can be cloned more and more easily. And so what happens in that environment, right? Storytelling becomes extremely important. Brand
Mm.
becomes extremely important. Unique experiences, human experiences become extremely valuable and differentiated. And essentially, the moat, to use business terminology, your defensibility, what makes unique as a business, becomes
Hmm.
a combination of brand, or in other words, storytelling. And those are not exactly the same thing, but brand and storytelling. And then if you're B2B, it's your sales motion. And if you're B2C, it's your distribution channels. And product is commodity, right? You're essentially in the
Hmm.
same business as Nike or Adidas. Or like, why do people buy Nike shoes instead of Adidas? It's not like
Right.
they have some like super feature of the Nike shoe. It's like way better than Adidas's features.
Hmm.
It's just I like the Nike visual design. I like their brand. I like their latest advertisement with Serena Williams or whatever it is. And so
I.
that's where I think the levers are going. But you still have to have a great product. I'm not saying product is not important. I'm saying that it's a constant battle to not lose the race, but that's not how you long term win in the future.
Hmm.
So
Maybe
push
I've
back and tell
blown.
me how I'm wrong.
No, maybe I've blown past your question and or misinterpreted something here, but I think there's an interesting nugget in there. So let me know if you've blown past this and I've missed something. But there's an interesting point in there that's okay. If I think it's very much a part of the conversation that, in a world where, relatively speaking, anyone can build their own software, speaking both at a consumer level and at a B2B level, why wouldn't they? And I think we've already asked that question. And I think you've given a very solid answer, which is maintenance is the broader answer.
How good is the support?
I could build my own chicken coop in the backyard right now too, but I know I don't have time to maintain it. I have chickens in my backyard. So I think there's that, but I think there's a question that goes deeper than that. Why, if I as a at the consumer level, if I could just build my own software for
Mhm.
whatever it is I'm trying to do, why wouldn't I? And I'm a little bit reminded of there's a lot of language around democratization of coding and of software development in a similar way to the language around just for what feels like a decently suitable analog, like recording hardware in the early to mid aughts, right? Suddenly, laptop production was a totally viable, at speaking as a musician, laptop production was a totally viable method to just record an album and release it. And you had distribution platforms jumping up, and now like
Logic and a
everybody,
MacBook.
yeah, and everybody could make music. This was a huge thing in the creative community. So too with filmmaking, so too with self-publishing of novels and things like that.
Right.
And I think on the one hand, there were still plenty of things keeping people from releasing their own music at a choice level.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, and I might catch some flack for this, but I think on average, I'm not sure that we saw the renaissance that was predicted, I think, in independent music. Never really materialized in the way that I think people expected it to.
Hmm.
And I think that one of the reasons for that, at least one of my takes at a high level, is that there's an extent to which the democratization of production tools did less to amplify excellent artists than it did to amplify mediocre ones, if I can say that,
Absolutely.
you
No,
know?
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. And this,
so,
of course, this
so
is across media and across tools as well. It's
yeah,
not only music.
exactly, exactly. And so that's really interesting to me, right?
Hmm.
We're
Hmm.
is entering into this era that feels very similar, where affordable tools exist for people to make aggressively mediocre software.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
maybe we're arriving at the same endpoint here. That yeah, I think one of the market differentiators you mentioned is like your sales motion.
Hmm.
I would include within that your, I don't know if you're counting this, but your post sales support, your renewal cycle, all of that, like the way that you pay attention to your customers
Yeah.
is going
Yeah.
to
In a word,
really, really
DX.
matter.
Right. Yeah.
And sure, yeah, propos. But I think it does bring me back to that storytelling motion. If we're going with a very broad definition of storytelling, storytelling through UI, like personally,
Mm.
for the glut of incredibly bad UI design, like the GeoCities era level, if we can all remember all the Angel Fire pages in the universe, right? That's what I'm expecting from uh, small batch, locally grown AI developed software.
Yeah. So I think absolutely correct observation. I totally agree with you. I think so. To lay out a little bit in more detail the sort of hypothesis, right? So I mentioned
Mm,
commoditization of product,
yeah.
the increasing relative importance of CX, and within
Mm,
that, all of the functions, including sales, marketing, support, success, and so on, all the things that touch customers, basically. I think your point I have to add to my hypothesis, which is about storytelling across these things, telling a unique
mm,
story, whether it's your landing page, your dashboard, how people feel when they talk to your support team or whatever, messages that the CEO puts out, and so on. Storytelling is absolutely a differentiator I think that will endure. And I think on the product point, similar to what happened with music and video and the internet in general, right? If anybody can publish anything and anybody has the tools to record, whether it's taking a photo or a song or recording a video like we're doing right now, if anybody can do it, then it raises the bar massively.
mm,
And the again, I think of this like micro leapfrogging, the metaphor I'm using or the analogy I'm using, where it's like you get a little bit ahead of one guy, and then as soon as it's public, then they can replicate what you're doing, and then they get a little bit ahead of you, and then you can replicate
right.
what they're doing, and then you get a little bit
I
ahead of
see.
them. And so it's this sort of endless race that you can't really win long term on the product
Mm,
side. And so that's where again I go back to the differentiators. But I do think that there's not going to magically be more musical geniuses in the world, right? Just
right,
because the tools got better,
right.
you lowered the barrier to entry, but you didn't raise the ceiling.
Yeah, and I suppose what I hope, which is great because I feel like it's very rare that I appear genuinely hopeful on a podcast. So this is great. Uh, but one of the sort of like broader market motions that isn't outside the norm for this sort of development, one of the things that I hope happens is just going back to the music analogy. What didn't happen, right, is that this massive renaissance of musical genius didn't necessarily materialize. It did in a smaller way than most people were expecting, but it didn't fully materialize. But what did happen is that um, all the pieces were in place for smaller publishers to be more effective and have a wider audience and to be more successful. And I think we saw this with small indie filmmakers for a while as
Mm,
well.
mm.
You know, smaller publishing houses. A24 wasn't always as big as it is today, for example. So I think that's a little bit what I'm hoping from this is in the product world and in the world of what's on offer for people like you and I, is that smaller software companies will do really well.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a trend there of the micro niche being of if you make something, it's like what was the quote? It's if you have 1,000 true fans, not 1,000 followers on your social media
Right,
profiles, but
right.
like 1,000 ride or die true fans of what you're doing, You can
Yeah.
build a business and build a great life, right?
Yeah.
And that's all you really need at a minimum, basically, to build something and have, especially use leverage all tools. You don't have to do everything from scratch. You can have like your little piece of the pie, your 0.0001 of the total market, but it's like they love you and they're not going anywhere. Then yeah, like you can absolutely do that. And there's something very positive there because again, the bar has been, not the bar, but the barriers have been lowered so much. If you just have an insight about something that 1,000 people really care about, then you can build it and you can do it, and that can be your thing.
Yeah. And even at a B2B level, I was talking with a CTO buddy of mine maybe a month ago, and we were just talking about some of this stuff, and he thought, and I agree with him, there's likely to be a cottage industry of medium to senior term developers who wind up on the kind of like journeyman route. I know there's a lot of talk of folks doing that for vibe coded software and like fixing all the things that are broken and janky. And that's certainly an option, but the other route again takes me back to the MS-DOS days where you'd hire a developer to develop your in-house tooling and software for
Hmm.
whatever your business was. If you were a large business, this is something you would have is you'd have these bespoke software solutions pre-SaaS days. So I think
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm sold on that happening in a big way, but I think it's a
Hmm.
really interesting idea and opportunity. And for the right people and the right businesses, I think it's really a compelling thought. And this being a CX podcast, I feel compelled to try and to circle the wagons here and bring it back on topic for your listeners. Um, I am really interested by what that means for, I think we've seen a lot of people enter consultancy. And I think that should those small software houses be successful in the way that I'm hoping that they are, I think that's a really viable option and a really interesting market motion to see happen,
Interesting. Okay.
right? Because
Yeah.
lots of little clients, that sounds like consulting to me.
Yeah. When you're talking, I imagined a, I'm going to use words here. I don't know if they're the correct words, but I imagine like a boutique CX consultancy, which is focused on a specific niche or even micro niche, and
Hmm.
they provide outsourced support, but it's not general. They're like, let's say, for example, there's somebody who has your background with music and they're like really are into like music tooling and they're like really
Hmm.
expert in all of the music tools in a space. They're just the subject matter expert on
Right,
music tools.
right.
And it's maybe a one-man team or maybe there's like a small team and then they have all their AI superpowers set up for them and they just say, "Oh, we can do this. We're the best at this for music tools." Right?
Yeah,
And by the
yeah,
way, we work with these other companies in the space. We're not going to share your data with them or whatever, but we're going to use our understanding of the space to give this amazing experience to people who are your customers who are our specialty. I could
yeah.
imagine that happening.
I think that's a great opportunity for like from the product focus as well as from the like the ICP focus, making the niche the actual end users. You're you can get as niche as you want to,
This kind of happens
finance in a
already,
certain
right?
demographic, right? Yeah,
It
exactly.
like it's I think it's already happening to some degree, but
Yeah.
I think also if you work, like for example, I know you work for Netwrix, which is focused on security and sort of identity and these sort of things. And if you at some point in the future you decide you want to get a new job and you go and work for another company, then your experience working for a security company is going to be
Right.
very relevant to your future
Right.
employer. And you're not going to bring Netwrix's secrets with you, but you're going to bring your experience and your understanding of that niche, right? So
Hmm.
there's sort of different ways to slice it, but I think, yeah, I'd like to go back to the previous theme. I think the bar is raised all the time, and so if you are in the top 1% of your subject, then you're in a good place. But if you're in the fuzzy middle, you're good at it, but you're not really great, then
Right.
yeah, maybe it's time to niche down a bit and get more specialized, get more
Yeah,
expertise.
yeah. Go to either of those sides a little bit
Hmm.
more. Yeah, get
Hmm.
the edges. And so centering back in on the theme of storytelling,
Yeah.
there's something that occurs to me within that I think feels like it feels like a kernel of advice I'm about to have. When you think about what are your books, movies, like you yourself, what are some of your favorite stories. This might blow up in my face, but give me a top handful, two, three, right?
Favorite stories. I love Cowboy Bebop, the anime,
Yes.
and favorite
That's actually all
books.
I need.
Yeah, go just rip off that then.
I was just curious to see if I could prove a point with an actual example, and I can with this one. I feel strongly that most people's most beloved stories, at least for the last, I don't know, 5 decades, half a century, are people's favorite because they are subversive. Subversion is a required quality of enduring art and things that
Interesting.
people really connect with.
Makes you think
Um,
differently. Yeah.
yeah, and Cowboy Bebop, it's a great example of that, right? It's this sort of hodgepodge of existing ideas and themes, right? The Western and Kung Fu operas and noir detective stories, but it plays with those tropes and with those themes, and even with the theme of it's an anime itself plays on some of those tropes in novel ways that are subversive and subvert those genres, right? And I think level of deep thought required for subversion is required for all great storytellers. And so I can tell you about even something when I arrived at Netwrix, right? I had never worked in cybersecurity before or in IT focused software. Most of my background was in either like HR tech or business systems or FinTech, that sort of
Hmm.
thing. And most of those users were either like in the L&D space, the learning and development space, or HR, or finally operations, or end users in the case of FinTech, just people trying to manage their finances. And so suddenly my user, my ICP, is IT folks. And I don't know them as well. I have a brother-in-law who works in IT and had some conversations with him, and I'm a nerd. So I fit into that category. But an early question I arrived at was I felt like one of our weaker areas was the more feelingsy, empathy kind of stuff. Like I'd see certain emails come through and they weren't bad, but I was like, we could acknowledge this problem a little differently, or we could have this conversation a little differently, or what have you.
Hmm.
And then I had this moment early on where I thought, does this user even care about that? On average, it's a different person. It's a very different, and I don't mean to rely too much on stereotypes or anything like that, but I genuinely considered it. I was like, maybe these like sysadmins on the other ends of this conversation don't care as much if we say, I'm so sorry, this must be so frustrating,
Ah,
or in the same way that someone in a head of HR experience. And spoiler, they do, but they do in a different way to A, subvert my own expectations for what excellent support looks like in that scenario. And B, I think find a what I would call, maybe I'm stretching the definition of subversive, but what I would call a sort of subversive way of affording that same care and empathy and all the emotional stuff that great CX involves, um, and tailor it to this audience who, again, did care, but I'd say on average they cared more about speed and being taken seriously than they did about being emotionally cared for. That was more of a secondary thing.
hmm.
So I think that's a key element. If you're not somebody out there thinking of yourself as a storyteller and thinking of yourself in particular as a subversive storyteller, um, I think that's that sort of like fringe we're talking about is subversion or deeper thinking about these kinds of things. And I think it also means that sort of niche experience notwithstanding, there are those we mentioned that kind of journeyman developer.
Hmm.
I think there are a lot of executives and a lot of uh, in every area of business who get into sort of a niche in their market and then they build their frameworks and they build their systems and they build like how they do things and then job after job after job they go forward doing that thing. I think that can be really effective and really positive and great. I can't work that way. And I do. But I can't build the same thing over and over again. It's exactly why I asked that question. Does this even matter to this audience?
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
because I'd much rather work with this. like a much looser framework um, than maybe I've seen some others work with. And I think that's where your opportunities for subversion come in. Like you have to leave gaps in your frameworks. You have to be filled by the bespoke needs, the specific needs of the
Right.
customers and the companies that you are doing that work for. And I think that when we talk about storytelling, that's a lot of what we're talking about is more the Mad Libs format than anything else.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think if you're too formulaic, if you're too prescriptive, if you're too rigid, you're not only are you going to not evolve with the times and with the needs that are the needs of the day, but you're not going to give yourself any space for serendipity, right? You're not going to give yourself any space to be agile, to adapt. And storytelling is like all communication. It's not only about what I have to say, it's who I'm saying it to, right? And thinking about both of
Mm.
those things at the same time, right? And if you are like a mad genius, for example, and you're just brilliant beyond brilliant, and you have all these ideas, and you really know how to make the world a better place, but if you can't communicate that to somebody and to many people in a way that they understand it in their own words and in their own mind, then you are going to have almost no impact on the world. You have to be translating in a matter of speaking. You have to be translating for other people and for your audience. And yeah, I think understanding in your example, like understanding that these system people are like technical, obviously technical folks, and their sort of business culture, if you will, is like, give me the facts, cut the fluff. I don't care
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
emotional padding. Just let's
Right.
get the job done, and then we can crack jokes
Yeah.
and do whatever after that. And they probably appreciate some subversive humor. They're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think that there's all this talk about, okay, what we have to be consistent as a brand, right? We have to
Mm.
tell a
Mm-hmm.
consistent story. And I think people lose sight of the adaptation. That's like half of it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And if I think about this with AI as well, I think we've probably talked in the past about how I'm a big kind of Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman and these sort of media theorists.
Hmm.
Marshall McLuhan, of course, being famous for the term "the medium is the message."
Yep.
And I don't have an answer for what that means yet for AI. It's both a because it's two things. It's both a tool and a medium, and so it makes it that much more difficult to define what is the core meaning of this particular medium. If you think of something later on, you let me know. But I think a lot about that, right?
Mm.
What is it communicating, especially in like customer environments, right? When I'm putting in front of a customer, what is this communicating in particular beyond what it's actually saying? And there's another gentleman whose work I would highly recommend to anybody listening to this. His name is, hold on, Rory. I bet this is
Rory
okay. Yep,
Sutherland,
Rory Sutherland. Yeah,
love
I
him.
knew you would know. I knew you would
So
know.
good.
Yeah, like literally any podcast he's been on or keynote he's given, I will take a listen to that because I think there's a ton of subversive value to and proof to what we're talking
Right.
about in the sort of things he talks about as well, where
Yeah.
you do something with the best of intentions that seems like a very straightforward solution to a stated customer problem, and it blows up in your face and folks go, why would you do this?
Yeah. Faster horse
So,
fallacy
mm,
and so on. Yeah. Rory Sutherland is a gem. I think I want to get your thoughts on this. So obviously
mm,
there's a really bad smell of AI slop and it's plague on LinkedIn. And And then, of course, we have all this conversation in the media about deepfakes and
mhm,
AI generated content in general, whether it's image or
mm,
video or whatever. I saw a website, I forget what it's called, but essentially it does a side-by-side comparison of a real photo and an AI generated photo, and it says which one's real. And you can just go through and be like this one or this one, and it's just testing your ability to like see the difference. And is the rate of people detecting the fakes is going down over time.
yeah.
um, and so I think maybe it's cynical, but I don't care if the content is AI generated. I only care if it's good content.
Mm,
And I think of AI, and this applies to CX as well, right? If you're giving me a customer experience and I'm talking to an AI chatbot or a human, like I don't care. I only care, is it good or not? Does it smell bad? Does it feel awkward and clunky? Or is it just smooth and gets me what I want? And it's like reasonably polite and so on. And I think that that's more and more, whether we like it or not, as much as I like humans and I like talking to people, but whether we like it or not, I think the trend is very clear. and it's hard to imagine, what is the analogy? Putting the cat back in the box, right? Like it's we're off to the races here.
Yeah, yeah.
And the demand or the requirement as leaders is quality. It's not, is this an
Yeah.
AI or a human or whatever? Am I writing my own LinkedIn post or is AI helping me? It's not the important part. The important part is
Mm.
like, is it actually valuable for the audience? Is it actually valuable and a good experience for the customer? And in that sense, AI is just another tool, right? If I use
Hmm.
the regular LinkedIn post text input box and just type everything by hand, I'm using a bunch of tools,
Yeah,
right? And AI is
yeah,
just another tool. And can you
yeah.
use it well or not, right? Is that's really all people care about, I think.
I think that question and questions like it are yet to be answered. I think
Oh, I feel
we're
like it's
already seeing.
totally answered. Come on.
Oh, I think there is still a lot that's unsettled, right? There's still a dearth of long-term studies to compare against each other on what, let's say, heavy use of AI does to neurological function.
Sure.
I
Cigarettes in the
think there's
1950s, right?
sure, and so too with like vibe coding, all the stuff that has to kind of be untied at the end of that cycle. I think there are a lot of questions that are unsettled, and I think that the answer, because I'm with you, there's a certain, for me, it's specific. There are some things, maybe a lot of things, when it comes to content in general,
Mhm.
where, yeah, I don't care if it's AI generated or not. And most of the spaces where I find that's true fall into the category of time wasters.
Hmm.
If I'm flipping through reels on my phone and I'm like picky enough in that moment of my daily experience to care deeply whether they're AI generated or not, I've chosen the wrong activity already, I think, for someone who's going to be that discerning. As a musician, I think I still care, um, to a certain extent, if music is generated by AI or not. And I think that too is contextual, right? When am I listening to the music and what am I listening to it for? In the case of CX, I think we all just have to remember that the best case scenario for anyone in our position is that no one ever reaches out to us. That's always been the case. It's always
Yeah,
been true. And like you tell teams this and they go, "What do you mean?" Because that sounds like making myself redundant. And then I say, "Yeah, exactly. Our goal as a team, like if we are operating at 100% capacity and everything is going exactly with the way we want it to, we will have made ourselves redundant."
right.
That's the name of the game. And so far, even with AI, I haven't really seen that happen yet.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to that. But the endpoint you have there to again put a story to it is all that brings us back to my job is not the tickets, my job is not the QBRs, my job is not the health checks or the emails I send or the calls that I have. My job is the customer. So whatever it is that customer needs or wants most, my job is both to advocate for and deliver to the customer those things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And to have the expertise required. Here's the clincher, which I think brings that subversion back in. The clincher is I have to be good enough at my job to know the difference between what someone is asking for and what they actually need. For product managers,
Yeah.
as for CX leaders, that's the differentiator ultimately because speaking of LinkedIn, I hand wrote a post on LinkedIn a while back about how
Old school.
I thought one area of business that I'm really skeptical of AI being good at is replacing excellent product managers
Mm.
because all the best product managers I've ever met have surprised me because I've given them all this feedback and people want this feature, or people want us to change this UI element in this way. And they
Yeah.
look at all of that and they go, cool, we're going to do this. And the this that they mentioned is not the thing anyone is asking for. Solves the problem, maybe two problems behind the one that is being
Right.
served. Haven't seen AI do that well yet. It will. Anything is possible. But I think that's, again, just to put a bow on it, that's where all the talk we've been doing of subversive thinking and deeper thinking and storytelling and expertise and bespoke solutions based on niche knowledge, that's where that comes in. Is the
Yeah.
customer is our job, helping customers, helping companies be good at customers uh, is our job, and knowing how to provide solutions that are surprisingly effective is
Hmm.
also our job. So no matter the channel, no matter the medium, I think there's lots of good work to be done there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to mention one thing here and then riff on what you're saying. But going back a little bit, you mentioned this. I think you said like a hollowing out of the middle. And are you familiar with Nassim Nicholas Taleb? He wrote about
Yes.
like Dark Swan and Anti-Fragile, and he has like a whole series of
Oh,
books.
yeah, sure. Yes.
Like one of his great ideas is this idea of the barbell strategy. So you invest in super high risk things and super low risk things and nothing in the middle.
Mm.
And the super low risk stuff will protect you against a disaster. High risk stuff will allow you to capture the upside of a wild bet, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I apply this into our conversation into CX specifically because I think that there is a hollowing out, and that's a negative framing. But if you think of it as a barbell strategy, now you have a positive framing and you can act on it, right? So you can say, okay, I'm going to intentionally place my bets here and not in this kind of fuzzy middle. And I think that you could say that you could apply this to many different things. So this would be like, I'm going to go deep on the human aspect, I'm going to go deep on the AI aspect, and we're not going to do like messy middle, right?
Mm.
Not going to do like AI and human stuff, tell everybody to ask like a random question at the end of every support ticket so it just sounds more
Right,
human.
right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's the kind of messy middle stuff where you're like
Include your
not really,
typos.
yeah, you're not really committing. So I
Yeah,
think like committing more deeply to the edges instead of playing around in the middle and not really getting there either way. I think that's a strategy that people can employ. And if you're upfront about it, don't try to fool people that you're like giving them AI. Here's our AI assistant. Make it helpful, make it useful, make it high quality,
100%.
and then give them the real human connection, like the real,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm gonna sit on this call with you. We're gonna chat. We might become friends. We're gonna build a relationship. Go
Yeah.
deeper into both sides, and don't get stuck in the middle. That's my thought there.
If you've got a highly look, if we're living in a future where you've got a highly capable AI assistant for your customers, throw some humans on there to train them on how to use it in there for
So,
things like
so
that.
Yeah, and so you were making the comment, your last comment about this product management that sees down to the root cause and develops
Mm.
the solution that solves the root cause, not just the
Yeah.
surface level comments.
Yeah.
I think that is a fundamentally a hard thing for AI to do, and it will remain so for a long time. Having a kind of a global context, a long-term vision, the product is beyond any quarterly metric or whatever. I think that is still very valuable and still very uniquely human and will be somewhat enduring. I think that the proliferation of these tools and data sources means that there is this ever growing kind of Mount Everest of data inside of every company. And like we have like spoons and we're like, oh, let me get like a little bit of dirt. And oh, let me look at it. And then let me get another spoon. It's like
Yep.
the
Yep.
mountain just gets bigger and bigger every day. And so
Yeah.
I see that as a fundamental point of human leverage is tying these things together beyond any individual data points and saying, here's this massive influx of data. Here's what we're actually going to focus on. Here's why. Here's the actions we're going to take, and breaking it down, refining it, and then making it into something actually usable. That takes a lot of human work, and there's tools that
Yeah.
can help you. But I think that there's a point of human leverage there, which I think is enduring, and that's a big opportunity for CX. I mean, for most functions, I think. And right now, I'm not going to talk specifically about Helpfeel in this podcast, but one of the things that we're thinking about is this: where are the new points of human leverage, right? Accelerate into the future. AI is doing all these things. Like, what are the points of human leverage? And data curation is like this really
Mm.
under-leveraged, untapped gold mine. There's gold in that mountain, and so
Absolutely.
that's one thing that I think people should pay more attention to and explore the opportunities there.
Yeah, I've been saying it for a while, and I guess it bears repeating, but I do think that the best practical advice anybody could be giving to CX folks these days is if you're at the IC level and you're closing tickets, learn a little bit of code, It's one of the best things you can do. For a leader, also learn a little bit of code, dust off your data science chops
Yeah.
and your old statistics textbook from college or something. Because I think you're exactly right. I think because ultimately, I still feel like data is everything, and being able to surface and read and tell effective and ideally true stories with data is a really difficult and, at least for now, yeah, uniquely human skill. But we also now have an army of agents that can scrub that data for us and read it way faster than we can. So use those too.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely. And I think pay people to do human things and pay robots
Mm.
to do robot things,
Amen,
right?
brother.
Don't pay robots to do human work. And don't pay humans to do robot work.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny too, because that threshold is going to be different for everybody, right?
Mhm.
In the same way that the needs of a different ideal customer profile are going to be different for every
Mhm.
business.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's another thing too, is both for you as a person and for us as business leaders, we have to figure out what does that phrase mean for us?
Yeah. Absolutely. Storytelling driven by data. I think that's a to sum it all up. All right,
As a
Colin, we've gone on for over an hour here. This is such a great conversation. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I could go on and on, but let's cap it here. And if people want to continue the conversation, Colin Flanigan on LinkedIn. I'm Ben Foden. I'm on LinkedIn, of course. And we'll see you in the comment section or on the next episode of the CX Files. Bye.